All right, let's jump right into a classic clinical puzzle. You order a CT scan for, say, belly pain, and the report comes back with something you totally weren't looking for, an adrenal mass. This little surprise is called an incidentaloma, and trust me, you're going to see a ton of them. The real question is, what do you do next? Let's build a framework.
So picture this, because it's going to happen. A CT for some vague abdominal issue shows a 2-centimeter adrenal nodule. Your patient feels totally fine, but now you have this finding. This one line in a report can kick off a whole bunch of questions. Having a super clear game plan is absolutely essential, not just to avoid a bunch of useless tests, but more importantly, to make sure you don't accidentally cause any harm.
So, here's our roadmap for the next few minutes. We're going to start by defining the problem. Then we'll zero in on the two big questions you have to ask every single time. Is it making hormones? And could it be cancer? After that, we'll talk management and then wrap up with the key takeaways you can start using right away.
Okay, let's get into our first section. Before we can even think about what to do with this mass, we need to be on the same page about what we're actually talking about. So here's the official definition. It's an adrenal mass. It has to be bigger than 1 centimeter, and this is key, it was found by accident. That size cutoff is really important, you know? Tiny little nodules under 1 centimeter are super common and almost never mean anything. We're focused on the ones that are big enough to count.
And believe me, you are going to see these. The numbers are surprisingly high. Up to 9% of people have one, and that number just goes up as people get older and as we get better and better at imaging. Now, the huge majority of these are totally harmless, but you can never ever assume that from the get-go.
And here it is. This is the single most important slide. Your entire workup, every time you find one of these, just boils down to answering two questions. First, is it functional? Meaning, is it pumping out extra hormones? And second, is it malignant? Could this thing be cancer? The answers to these two questions literally drive every single decision that follows.
So let's tackle that first big question. Remember, the adrenal glands are basically hormone factories. They make cortisol for stress, aldosterone for your blood pressure, and catecholamines for that fight or flight response. A decent chunk of these tumors can hijack that machinery, and if you miss a functional tumor, it can cause some serious problems for your patient.
And this isn't just a theoretical thing. The data shows that somewhere around 10 to 15% of these incidentalomas are actually functional. They're churning out extra hormones. That's a pretty big number, which is exactly why the blood and urine tests, the biochemical workup, is never optional. It's a mandatory first step.
Now, this slide is great because it basically writes your orders for you. It's a really simple tiered approach. Every single patient gets tested for cortisol excess, no exceptions. Now, if your patient also has high blood pressure, you add on a screen for primary aldosteronism. And then, if the CT report says the density is over 10 Hounsfield units, you absolutely have to screen for pheochromocytoma. It's a smart, tailored approach.
You know, the most common thing you're going to find isn't some dramatic textbook case of Cushing syndrome. It's usually something much more subtle called mild autonomous cortisol secretion. This low-grade hypercortisolism can quietly contribute to things like high blood pressure, weight gain, even osteoporosis. And the screening test for this is the overnight 1 milligram dexamethasone suppression test. Okay, so we've got the labs cooking. Now let's switch gears and go back to the imaging. The CT scan itself holds a ton of clues about whether this mass is just a benign little guy or something we need to be more worried about. If there is one number to burn into your brain from this whole talk, it's this one, 10 Hounsfield units, on a CT without contrast. Why? Because a benign adenoma is full of fat, full of lipid. That makes it have a really low density, almost like water, pretty much always 10 Hounsfield units or less. Anything above that is a red flag. It doesn't automatically mean it's cancer, but it means it's not your run-of-the-mill benign adenoma. And this table just lays out the other visual clues perfectly. Your benign adenomas, they tend to be small, you know, under 4 centimeters, with that classic low density and nice smooth round borders. The suspicious masses we worry about, like an adrenocortical carcinoma or a pheo, they tend to be bigger, denser, with weird irregular borders, and might even look messy on the inside because of necrosis or uneven enhancement.
All right, so you've got your lab results back, and you've taken a hard look at the imaging. Now it's time to put all those pieces together and figure out what to do next.
This question comes up all the time, and it is a major potential pitfall. You know, the natural instincts for a lot of us is, I see a mass, I should probably stick a needle in it to see what it is. But with the adrenal gland, that can be a truly disastrous move.
So the answer is almost always no. A biopsy is very rarely the right thing to do. And here's the absolute, non-negotiable, carved-in-stone rule. You must have biochemically ruled out a pheochromocytoma before you would ever even think about a biopsy.
And here's why that rule exists. If that mass happens to be a pheochromocytoma and you poke it with a needle, you can cause a massive flood of catecholamines, sending the patient into a life-threatening hypertensive crisis right there on the table. On top of that, if it's a primary adrenal cancer, you can actually spread the cancer cells along the needle path. So we really only do biopsies when we think cancer has spread to the adrenal gland from somewhere else.
Okay, we have covered a ton of ground. Let's just boil this all down to the most important, high-yield points that you absolutely have to remember. Here it is, your cheat sheet. Number 1, every incidentaloma gets a dexamethasone suppression test. 2, if that thing is dense on CT, over 10 Hounsfield units, you screen for a pheo. 3, if the patient has high blood pressure, you check for primary aldosteronism. 4, just fight that urge to biopsy. And finally, number 5, these cases can get tricky. Never ever hesitate to call your friendly neighborhood endocrinologist.
And I'll leave you with this last thought. Even if the mass turns out to be totally benign and non-functional after the initial workup, the story might not be over. Think about those patients with that mild autonomous cortisol secretion. How does that new diagnosis change how you manage their diabetes, or their blood pressure, or their bone health? Finding an incidentaloma is often just the beginning of a much bigger conversation about a patient's total metabolic health.